Thanks, everybody. My name is David Potter. I head up the global practices team for Howard Goldberg. We can sit if you guys want to. So I like coming off the market intelligence because Lloyd and Rachel talked about two things that I'm heavily involved in with IoT and security, obviously. Security being near and dear to my heart. The thing we're talking about here is, equipping customers for the when. So when it happens, right? And I know nothing ever bad will happen because your networks are perfect and your customers never do anything wrong and nothing ever bad happens. But proverbially, when something happens, when they're breached, when they're owned, whatever that might be, how do we respond to that, or how do we prepare customers for those things? I think we've talked to a lot of customers, I know I have, that they've sold a lot of things, they put a lot of point solutions in, and they're starting to stitch them together in a pretty solid way. But as we move forward, I think the one that interests me is the plethora of IoT devices that are out there that are completely unmanaged, completely unknown. We don't really know what normal looks like for those things. How do we plan for these things that we may not have complete visibility into, and how do we get our customers ready for those things? So have you guys introduce yourselves and then let you take a crack at it if you want to. Richard?
Sure. So hi, my name is Richard Ford. I'm the chief scientist over at Forcepoint. Fun job. We should talk about that over a cocktail tonight. And in that role, I'm sitting across the whole business, sort of worrying about some of these questions. So how do our customers plan for it? Badly, probably. And I say that with no disrespect to our customers, right? So one of the things that we do, and it starts with people, is you tabletop what happens when you're breached. The number of customers that we have that have never sat down and done the what-if scenario. So, you end up having a CEO trying to find the right words around what should we tell the press, in real time, and we see people do things that can potentially make things worse. GDPR, e-privacy, all these bits of legislation have certain requirements around making things go faster around breach notification too. So, let me come at this from a non-technology standpoint. I'd say the first thing is have a plan, right? And then test the plan, because, it's one thing to have a plan, and then it's another thing to turn the engine over and discover that, one part hits another and nothing quite works right. So if I was working with anyone, the first thing isn't technology. I start with the people. It's all about the people. Have a plan, and then test the plan, and then completely rewrite the plan because you discover your first round didn't work.
I agree with that. So hi everyone, my name is Todd Moore. I'm a senior vice president responsible for our encryption business, data protection business at Gemalto. When I talk to customers about the when, and we know it's going to happen, it goes along with the people. There's really three things, and we've all been around the business for a while, security business. It all comes down to three things. It's people, devices, and the data itself. It's always about the data. And we heard that at the previous panel as well too, data everywhere. And so when it comes to the people for us, it's making sure that you know who's on your networks, why they're there, what they're doing, and making sure that they have, very simple access to what they should have access to. And so it's really understanding that, not just from planning, but knowing who has access to what. For the devices, and this goes to IoT, it's really understanding what is on your network. That could be a computer, it could be a tablet, a cell phone, a mobile phone, or it could be an IoT, a device. And it's really making sure the integrity of that device is sound, that we know what's there and why it's there for the same reasons as the people. And last but not least, it's the data. And that's the most important thing that people forget about, that in every organization, there's something important to that organization, and to make sure that they're protecting it properly, no matter where that's stored, whether it's in the cloud or it's on-premise in a database. And so when we talk about the when, it is about the planning, but it's those three aspects I think that we really focus on: people, data, and devices.
So with that, so going along with all these things that are coming out, and this solutions orientation is really great because that is a big part of my title, right? And my role is to do those solutions. There's this whole premise of, go faster, deploy, don't interrupt the speed of business. The thought process though is there a point when you need to stop that, when you actually do need to stop business before, these giant outbreaks happen, before the breach notification happens, or is there a different when, to address those things, right? I mean, we talk about, not interrupting workflows and things like that. Are there different approaches to that, or how do you guys take a look at, when those things happen? How do you stop? How do you remediate? Or how do you alert for it? Or what would you look for in that sort of organization?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to risk appetite, right, for the when, because every organization's different. There are some things, if you're in healthcare, for example, you can't shut down under certain circumstances, right? You have a service that has to be provided. So it comes down to risk appetite and then deciding, because what are we really in? We're not really in the security business. We're in the risk management business, right? What we're there to do is to make certain that people are safe and the business continues. We enable the business. And doing business is risk, right? If I want to get rid of all the risk in my business, I can shut the doors today, right? So it's the same with cyber. So when you're dealing with that it's about the risk management. How do you manage it? And that's again, it comes back to the planning perspective. And you know, back to your point on the planning, one of the interesting things is, yeah, the first time you run the plan, you discover that you've forgotten about all the unmanaged devices that are kicking around your network. And you're like, well, but I don't know what these IP addresses are. They're granted, you know, through DHCP, and it's some sort of BYOD device. And so, yeah, that's the nice thing about tabletopping it, actually not just talking about the plan, but doing the mock exercise. It's fun to watch people sweat, actually. It really is. You know, as they go, oh, this ain't gonna work. Yeah. So, but no, so I do all this through the lens of risk. We are absolutely not in the risk removal business. We're in the risk management business. Every single thing has a different risk appetite, right? So if you have a production line with a bunch of OT, you know, on it, your risk appetite is very different potentially than if you're dealing with, if you're a pure data play, where you have to worry about the damage caused by loss of data versus the damage caused by heavy industrial equipment doing something that it shouldn't do. Gotcha. So I always think risk. That's where I always go in this.
I think that's a good approach.
No, and absolutely agree, Richard, that risk isn't, we're agreeing, is a key point.
Hey, to figure this out.
But, you know, in terms of business continuity, I mean, it isn't an option, at least for the companies Gemalto is working with. We're working with large enterprises, governments, finance, healthcare organizations, as Richard just mentioned. And there's no, we can't afford the downtime. So every organization has to tolerate some level of risk. They have to put the processes in place. If you could, you know, define a perfect breach, a perfect win, you know, it would be that, you know, the board of directors stand up and say, yes, we had a breach. It was contained, it was remediated very quickly, and oh, by the way, this is the amount of private or personal data that was lost, and it was very minimized. And I think that comes back to the risk tolerance. Again, knowing the basics, going back to the foundation, it all comes down to those things we heard about years ago, CIAA, confidentiality, integrity, auditability, and availability. Just putting the right security practices in place, defining the policies and that risk, and making sure when that bad thing does happen, you've minimized what could be the impact to your business, to a particular business.
Yeah, I find it amusing that we're sitting here, right? And what we're saying is the basics really, really matter in security, right? The three of us in violent agreement on that one. But they're not as shiny as some of the new things coming down the pike. But if you get your basics right, and good things tend to sort of keep happening.
And so there's a couple things there. So you mentioned the perfect breach, you stand up and announce, which usually means that somebody's fired as a result of that. That's one of the knock-on effects. So to that, I mean, I think probably 2015, 2016, you know, definitely like the year of the breach, right? We heard about so many big ones, right? And you will still see them here and there, but they don't seem to be as prevalent as they were. You know, I mean, there's not as much notification. My question is, do you think that people aren't saying as much about it, or that they're not being as publicized? Or are we actually doing things better?
It's a good question. I mean, with some of the emerging standards like GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union, as well as Australian privacy laws, I mean, the rest of the world's finally coming up to the US when it comes to notification of breaches. So you would think that we're going to see more notification of breaches around the world. I think that enterprises have caught on and are putting some of the risk management tools in place to help prevent, but I do think the breaches are occurring and they will continue to occur. I don't think we've stopped them. I guess if we look at different market, a lot of us as vendors are working with large enterprises, and so we're really focusing on those big companies and governments and making sure that they're secure, they're minimizing their risk. The people that are losing out is the small, medium business, the small, medium enterprises. I don't think, you know, let's be honest, security is difficult, and part of our job is to make it simpler. And I think, I don't know about Richard in your business, but in our business, we're working hard to simplify security so that we kind of make it easier for folks to be able to consume and to deploy security in those small, medium enterprises. So they're going to get breached even more and even faster, so how we can help them. And it was said earlier, I think, by Lloyd in a session about all of us are moving to services. That's something we're doing as well to make that simplification happen. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would agree, yeah. It's about making security more accessible, to the point that I don't even try and talk to my customers about security anymore. I try and use a different S word, which is safety, right? Because when you think about security, security is something you opt into. I'm going to choose to be secure, right? So when you design for security, you give somebody a path through the maze. When you design for safety, you make it really hard to get out of the maze and fall onto something pointy, right? So it's a different mindset. So yeah, we need to make security the default in the same way that GDPR tries to push us to make privacy the default. To the point where I hope in 5 years' time we're having this conversation around safety more than around security, because I think that's important. On the breaches, I think I would actually argue that the pace hasn't slowed down that much. I was doing some prep, which would shock the people that know me well. So you know how seriously I was taking this now. I was doing some prep work for this, and I was looking at 2018. It's actually been a pretty tough year. I mean, you know, and we've become numb to it. Right. I think we've become very desensitized. Look at the data that was potentially spilled by, I think it was Exactis. Was that 2 terabytes of very detailed marketing-related data around folks, right? That's a lot. It's about 340 million people or so. So I don't know if I'd call that slowing down.
So I think that's probably a very fair point. And so I think you're right, we're inured to it. It's like, another breach, whatever. And so with all this clouds, whatever, new workloads in the cloud or whatever, and all this data and all of our personal data, IoT sensors on pretty much everything. I mean, most of you are wearing one, or you're carrying 3 or 4 of them. Your Apple iPhone is one. So when that data is not really in our control anymore, and from an enterprise standpoint, it's not in our control anymore. So this is a twofold question. You can answer it either way you want, or both. What are we doing well, and what do we suck at, and what are some simple steps that we should be taking? So it's a 3-part question, right? And so there's technology approaches. I think I like the idea of safety. Training's an aspect of it, but there is a part where certain technologies do come to bear. So I think, like I said, security is hard. So what are some ways that you guys look at it and some of your approaches? Don't everybody do it at once.
We're looking at each other. Okay.
They're like,
so what are we doing well? Well, the good news is that I think in the boardroom, there's a much better mind share around security, right? So when I talk to boards of directors, I have really quite well-informed conversations now around security. So that's a huge gold star to the security community, right? I think that, we're starting to get our arms around identity a little bit more. Google put out some very interesting information earlier this year when they talked about the fact that they're claiming, and I have no reason to disbelieve them, that since they switched to multi-factor authentication, they have had 0 hostile account takeovers through credential compromise, right? Which is pretty stellar. That's a great result. That's an example of us starting to do something well. So that will be the short part of my answer, because you asked me what are we doing less well.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's a lot. And again, that's not pointing the finger and blaming, right? Because I get it. Business, unless you're a security company, you're not in the business of doing security. Security is an enabler so you can do whatever your business is. But there's a lot of the basics that aren't done, right? The fact that I still use a username and password to log into stuff just blows my mind. There's 1,000 different ways to authenticate that are better than that, right? That are more secure. And the nasty statistics behind that is it depends on which survey you read, but people are claiming between 80 and 90% at some point of breaches can be traced back to compromised credentials. Now think about that for a minute, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff in the basics that don't get done. We're doing a horrible job at getting a trained workforce, right? So there's been a national crisis around trained workforce in cybersecurity for a long time, especially in the cleared side of the house. Cleared cybersecurity people, right, are rare as hen's teeth. I mean, I literally have had recruiters call me and go, Richard, whatever we're paying, whatever you're getting paid, we'll double it. I'm like, but we haven't, who, what, why, what, who? I can't hang on to people by paying them in cashy money, right? It's about all the other things that go with the job. Do they have an arc? Do they have a future? So retention, training, that's a train wreck. I'm trying not to take every sort of piece of high ground here. Yeah, but so the question was, what are we doing?
You let him go first.
Yeah, well, So what are we doing well? What are we doing badly? I mean, there are a few other things, right?
Right.
But those, to me, I'm trying to pick some different ones. And that was the third part question. What was the third part?
From an adoption standpoint, so those things that we are good at and maybe not so good at, what are some quick wins that companies could do to start mitigating? So before that, I'm gonna ask you a survey question. This is the interactive part of the show. So show of hands, how many of you have a Google account? I'm serious, show of hands. This is the interactive part. Keep your hands up. I meant now keep your hand up if you have two-factor authentication on your Google account. And you're in the industry. So two things. Come talk to me about that because we can fix that. But I mean, so I think that illustrates your point. Within our own industry, it's an ongoing problem. Why? Because it's hard. So, so what are some of the easier steps to mitigate some of that?
Yeah, so changing your mindset about reducing, so a lot of the times, us security guys, we love to say, no, this is broken, don't do it, it's insecure, please leave my desk, right? Right, yeah, exactly, you've had that conversation.
Yeah.
And we need to respin it a little bit to go, what can I do to make my users' lives simpler? Right, that simple switch of getting rid of security friction and turning security into more of a business enabler is a big one. Right, so that's a change that I've been trying to drive throughout our organization and in our product design, right, because I'm heavily involved in next-gen product design for the company, is how do I make this product simpler to use, more transparent, less likely to cause you harm, and more likely to sort of prompt you to do the right thing when you have to make a decision as a human being. You know, I feel like for the longest time in security, right, it's like the security vendors have been making these six-fingered gloves for people and going, come on, man, grow another finger. You know, you can grow into it. Instead of going, oh, humans have 5 fingers. Let's design something that really fits the user. So we've got to be much more user-centric. That's something that we as an industry can do. Some of the easy wins from a tech standpoint, figure out your identity, IAM, two-factor, however you want to do it. Be consistent. And then the other tech that I see woefully underused is DLP, right? Data loss prevention, data loss protection. Depends,
right.
You know, where you grew up,
right?
And I think that so many companies use that just for compliance, and it can do so much more for you. And it's a pity that it's not more widely adopted.
And you guys are kind of good at that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we are kind of good at that. That is, I have dreams about data now. It's sort of all very distressing. But yeah, I mean, even if it's not ours, just do something smart with DLP, and the world will be a better place.
Gotcha. Thoughts?
Wow, you took all my thunder. Now let me think of some answer.
You let him go first.
It's my fault.
A
couple, I agree with a lot of the points you just made, Richard, and I'll just add maybe a couple other things. So what we're doing well, we're really focusing on who's using our security technology in the stack. So what do I mean by that? Originally, when we had all the breaches first occur, the win, CEOs, boards would just throw money at the problem. It was like throwing spaghetti on the wall. There was a ton of money. We all know that as an industry, that there was just a lot of money. There were people buying solutions that didn't make any sense. I think now you're going to see, and we are trying as vendors, to be able to bring solutions and platforms that really address the user need, the problem. And we're really addressing a different buyer now. We're addressing the application developers. We're looking at different people within that IT department that really need those solutions. So we've gotten a little bit better about that over time, and that's helped us uncover more opportunity, and it's actually getting more value back to our customers. I think that's going to help all of us sell more going forward. On the negative side, I agree wholeheartedly. I don't know what metric you gave, but we've seen in our research about 2/3 of all breaches, and it really goes into 2 categories when a breach occurs. The first category is someone getting some credentials and escalating them, or using those credentials to get to admin and be able to get access to database and critical data. The other third of breaches fall into data protection, where once someone gets access to a database or to a file or a storage, they find that the data is not encrypted and it's not protected. They just pull it out, and we make it easy for them to do that. So I think that's something that we haven't done well, is really educating people about that need. You know, quite simply, not using passwords, using multi-factor authentication for every small, medium business, every enterprise is one simple solution to that. I mean, when I talk to customers, they'll tell me, I ask them how is their data protection strategy. They'll say, oh, we're protected. We protect in storage. And I'm like, that's great. So the storage array has an encryption key. Yes. Do you realize when that disk is spinning, your data is not protected? It only protects against one problem, that disk gets stolen and someone doesn't have the encryption key to decrypt. So I still think there is some training, some knowledge out there. There's some misunderstanding that when you say you've implemented data protection or you've done something to protect the data, they don't necessarily understand, our customers don't necessarily understand what does that mean. And I think by getting the different people in the stack, going back to the first point, we'll get more education, we'll get more understanding, and we'll pick the right security solutions for them, which makes us smarter as vendors and makes our customers smarter and more happy.
So these aren't new problems, though. That's the thing. So
no,
it goes back to, yeah. So why aren't we? And I guess I'm kind of calling some of us out, myself included, right? I ran organizations that we had some of the same issues, right? Why aren't we doing these things already then? is the question. And is it because I mean, I think some of it is the skills gap that we talked about, and some of it is, you know, hey, we're gonna go back and encrypt your entire array. Well, how long is that gonna take? You know, and so is it a services issue, or, you know, or is it priority, or, I mean, what are you guys seeing, and where the adoption falls off? Because these are, candidly, none of this stuff we're saying is that new, right? I mean.
Well, I think, again, it comes back to that point. I'll go first this time, sorry. I think it goes back to that point we made security hard. We did that. We have to make it simpler. Automation, orchestration, we've got to wrap, you know, make it point, click, deploy is a buzzword, but making it so easy for folks. We got to be able to tie it into the business processes like we talked about before. It comes down, it does come back to the identity. It comes back to the data itself, who you are, what you have access to, when that data gets created, classifying that it's critical, and protecting it in the right way. And our industry also has to get better at doing the reverse. Once we understand where the critical data is, you know, there's different machine learning, artificial intelligence, other active methods to make sure that as that data gets accessed, is it really critical, or is the data adjacent to it really critical? And making sure we're making those right rule sets and updating, and make sure we really are protecting what is critical to the organizations. So they're old problems. I would argue that companies like ours are working to get to that automation orchestration. There is a lot of consolidation in our space right now, where many of us are buying techno bricks to be able to do that whole full platform type implementation, data life implementation, and I think you're going to see more of that as we go forward. So I think it's being addressed.
Yeah.
It's just not here yet today,
Right.
and we're still
Gotcha.
trying to get there.
So I'll go in a different direction. I think that part of the challenge is that we traditionally within our companies market security as a tax. It's like something you have to buy, you know, it's like paying your taxes, right? Nobody's wild about it. It's not a bonus. You don't go, oh man, I'm spending all this money for this thing. We need to flip it to more of an enabler. It's not about stopping unpleasant things from happening. It's about enabling the business to enter new markets or to enter markets safely. And I think that sort of, you know, flipping the image from white to black or black to white can help a lot. In terms of how old of a problem it is, just to digress for a funny story. Ransomware, pretty new problem, right? Not so new. First, anyone out there in audience land remember the first really big ransomware attack? Anyone at all? Because I got some funny stories around this one that I can't share on the stage. It was, either of you gents want to have a lash at it? It's early.
I think it was like 98, 99.
Keep going.
Okay.
So this predates the internet. 1989, the person that was charged with it was Dr. Joseph Pop. It was the AIDS Trojan diskette, which were 5.25-inch discs.
That's right.
Right, sent by the PC Cyborg Corporation. I say allegedly, Joseph,
Right.
because while he was extradited from the US to the UK, he was sent back. The trial was never completed, as he was found unfit, I believe, at the time to stand trial. But that was 1989, right?
That's right,
I
I remember
mean,
that.
these are really old problems, right? That are dressed up in new technology, so they look different. You know, when I talk about NotPetya or WannaCry, I'm really talking about the AIDS Trojan diskette from 1989.
Yeah.
And part of that is that we value the progress of technology more than we necessarily value the safety or the underpinnings, right? So given the choice of going faster or going safer, we typically choose going faster because that's what you need to be competitive in the market. So again, no fault to go around on that one. I would do the same thing. I have been doing the same thing. But certainly I look at myself in the mirror as I get towards the sort of far end of my career and go, heck, I've been doing this since 1989 and I'm still dealing with the same bits of malware. You know, it kind of hurts. Do I feel like I failed some of you in this room? I'm going to be transparent and say yes. But it's about changing that sort of context. We got caught up in this very threat-centric view of the world for a long time, too, about, oh, you just stop the bad stuff at the edges of the network and it'll all be okay. And I think we both agree it's a losing battle, right?
Well, because it was the way to sell stuff, right? It was scary and bad, and oh my goodness, you're going to get owned and hacked, and all your stuff's going to get stolen. Hell, it was a good selling technique, you know. It worked, but yeah. So kind of on that, so I mean, what if you could change something about the industry? You know, this is the kind of that whole like, you know, where are you going to be in 20 years in your career? I think it's a beach with a Ferrari, but you know, if you could change one thing about the industry, regardless, you know, beyond the education. I mean, is it education? Is it more frictionless security? I mean, if you could change anything about the industry, what would it be?
You look pensive there.
Yeah.
All right.
This is my think pose,
I know, okay.
right? I'm channeling my
I would say,
yeah.
I think If we change anything about the industry, it would be the reactional nature of our business. I think that something pops up, it could be a breach of some sort, and then there's a kabillion startups tomorrow with a technology that plugs that hole. I think everything we've been talking about here, it's getting back to basics, getting back to foundation. If you want to pick what you just said, I would say frictionless security. I would love to see in the next 20 years where people don't think about, our users don't think about security. They don't want to. We already talked about that. They want it built in. They just want it to happen. No one wakes up in the morning wanting to buy a hardware security module that Gemalto has, as a root of trust. They want to be able to know that things are being protected, we're doing it at the right risk levels, the business is safe, and the guys can sleep at night, the CEOs can sleep at night knowing the business is safe. So I think we're all working to that, to automate, orchestrate, putting the security at the front of the data creation and making sure we're protecting it throughout its whole life cycle. That would be my nirvana, and get away from the be more proactive, I guess I'm trying to say, than reactive as we are today.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. And by the way, Todd, I'm kind of interested in that hardware security module. I do wake up in the morning and go, oh man, hardware security.
Thank you for that.
I'm pretty excited about that.
Does anyone else in the room wake up in the morning thinking about hardware security modules? Does anybody else care? I've got a couple hands. Thank you. Thank you.
He'll buy you a beer if you say so. So, I mean, you could lie to him.
So, I guess what I would like to change, and let me be provocative.
Absolutely.
Is I'd like to move from being, having a heavy element of snake oil in the industry to being science-based, right? Because this is too jolly important to be based on, kills 99.99% of all known germs, and some viruses and malware as well, right? It's science. We can measure this stuff. We've been able to measure it for ages. It's not my opinion where my products are better and where they're worse, right? It's science. It's very deterministic. And yet we don't see that at all. We literally have vendors who go, well, we don't really have any data on how well this works, but try it, you'll like it, right? That's not, our customers' data is way too important to just sort of stick your finger in the air and go, which side feels cold, know? That I want to see security mature past who can do it quickest, who can do it shiniest, to what is the real protection provided, against particular threats? That'll get us away from some of this sort of silver bullet syndrome. For a start, everybody knows we don't need a silver bullet, we need a magic bullet, because silver bullets only work on werewolves, right? You need something better in the security world. I think that it's moving towards fact-based, evidence-based decisions. For example, in encryption, right? That's an area that is much more mature. Encryption's out there, you can test the algorithms are typically open, so they're peer-reviewed, it's very strong. We know mathematically how difficult it is to break skipjack over triple dares over, pick your favorite poison. We need to evolve security so it's much more fact-based and much less who's got the best marketing department based.
I would agree with that. So here's another provocative question, because I like them. It's been, I've heard the conversation, so beyond the credentials, but the vulnerabilities, so, privilege escalation, or, attaching a command shell to a DLL, whatever your exploit vector might be at that point in time. Is there a point where you actually hold the code writer responsible? Does it force them to write better code? Because right now, if you can just write code, commit to GitHub, and, you run what you run, and you get what you get, are we chasing it after the fact because it's crap code? And do you think automation orchestration and science-based can actually help mitigate some of those because we can actually find the human error?
I'm going to offer Todd first lash, but I'm happy to jump in too.
I'm going to pass on this one. You go ahead.
So I think the video is still out there. It was an April Fool's video put out by Microsoft called the Microsoft We Share Your Pain program, which they circulated internally, which is every time the sort of crash box comes up, it traces it back to the person in Microsoft who has electrodes on their seat and gets a shock.
I missed that, but I totally want that.
Yeah, no, I will find a copy of it for you. I did suggest that for our development leads, but they turned it down for some reason. There's a dangerous game that you're potentially playing, right? So let's talk by analogy. Remember what happened to the U.S. private aircraft manufacturing industry, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? We almost wiped it off the face of the planet because every single airplane crashed, small plane that crashed, It was, somebody was going to get sued, and it was usually Piper, right, or Cessna. And we drove those companies to, to bankruptcy, basically. Writing code isn't easy, and people make mistakes at a fairly regular basis. There's a difference between being irresponsible in your coding practices and having bugs in your code. I will be the first person, look, I was the first person, there you go, put my hand up and go, I bet there are bugs in our code base, right?
Sure.
And I've got developers that are trained in security. Right, this is why my sales guys always get nervous when there's, oh, Richard's on stage, okay. We need to not let him out of the lab. But there's a difference between error and, incompetence or reckless endangerment. So how you figure that out without suing the software industry out of existence is an interesting question. With that said, nobody ever hired me or didn't hire me because I write more secure code than the other person I was interviewing against, right? I came up through coding. Coding is what I love to do. If I ever get the chance to, roll up my sleeves and actually write code, it's what I do. But that's a hard question. There's a difference, though, I think, between reckless, like using a static encryption key, right? That's baked into the device. That doesn't change, So once you've got the key, you've got all the devices. Are devices in IoT space done like that sometimes? Yeah, I'm not going to name any names, right? But I'm sure you've been following news stories. That to me is a little bit reckless. You should have been able to see it coming. Versus, oh my God, it's an off by one error in array. I didn't see it. My automated software security practices didn't pick it up. That's one. On the former, I'd say sure, track it down to root cause, and there should be some comeback. On the latter, that's sort of what it is to do business. That may have been a longer answer than you
No, it's actually good. And go ahead.
Oh, I'll try answering.
Yeah.
Okay,
go
all
ahead.
right.
I'm gonna try.
Not as good. I'll try.
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you go ask a U.S. government cryptographer an algorithm, a mathematical equation, can it be broken? And that's their first hypothesis, their first view assumption is that every algorithm can be broken. And so I think that's kind of a mindset that we'd love to have in coding. I know our coders as well, there's bugs. We have to make the assumption there's going to be bugs, there's going to be problems in that code. But it all comes back to the risk then. It's the risk assessment. If I'm going to implement an algorithm or I'm going to implement a code, it's going to depend on my business risk. If I'm in the airplane industry, I'm going to take the time to make sure that I look at every one of those lines of code to make sure that those wheels come down when it's ready, when the plane's ready to land. But if I'm working in a lot of the commercial industries we're talking about, maybe I can accept a little bit more risk that that bug may, impact my SLA, may impact a little bit of what I'm doing operationally. But again, I put redundancy in place, I put remediation in place to be able to fix those things. And us as vendors every day get calls from the field of how we're going to make sure that we remedy those bugs that are always popping up. So I do think it's a risk assessment again across. You have to assume the bugs are going to be there, the code's going to be faulty, but it's how you deal with that and how you manage that out in the wild.
And I agree, it's a slippery slope, right? Because I see it kind of, and I get it sort of, but I'll counterpoint with this, is that any 13-year-old kid, and all of us, can go to the Apple Store, you can download Swift, you can download the Visual Studio, and it's not too hard to write an app these days. And so whether it's reckless or not, I would say there's probably also ignorance, right? Reckless is if you knew better and did it anyway, I'm going to come kick you in the knee. If it's a straight up like off by one error, I don't like totally bone something, that's fine, right? But if it's, hey, I figured out enough to build this cool little app and it does this thing, but you have no concept of secure coding or security as anything. So is it incumbent on Apple or Google or Microsoft to build the security into that tool set to make it easier, to your earlier point? Because if we're enabling all these, or as now you've got repositories with hundreds of thousands of apps and code on GitHub, et cetera. So what if I snag that code because it does the thing I need to ensure lockdown position of my aircraft wheels? Do I use that because it works because coders are lazy, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So at what point, because now with IT it was like, well, yeah, we got breached, we lost some money, that sucks, but no one's going to die. Well, now here in that new IoT world, there is a propensity, there's a chance now that somebody could die and that's a little bit dramatic, but there's some truth in that now. So I guess that's my question is that, maybe it's more of a discussion over beer later, but thoughts?
Well, I mean, just the first thought that comes to mind is looking at GitHub, just looking at the industry, the security industry, we are providing a lot of software development kits. There's companies out there that particularly focus on the developers, and they are providing some pretty good software development kits. And you're right, there's always going to be the kit kitty or whatever they call it that just does it themselves.
Yep.
But most developers today don't want to reinvent the wheel,
Right.
and they're going to go use what's available to them. And I think that is one of the positives of the security industry, that we've done a pretty good job of putting out into open source a lot of libraries these days that have been vetted and actually are meant for developers to be able to have a starting point. And we all want to tie those libraries back into something that we could sell and monetize. But I think it is getting a little bit better in that case. And
Cool.
and you can't stop the reckless people, right?
Right.
I mean, they could choose to use it or not use it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what you don't want to do is have a chilling effect on
Right.
innovation in the industry, right? So,
Exactly.
So there's always that sort of challenge. And, a good example would be crypto libraries, right? So some of the crypto libraries out there are pretty good. The reason people's crypto doesn't work is the way that the library was used, not the library itself. And so you sort of end up chasing this. A lot of the dev kits like Visual Studio are trying to do more to bake security in. The languages are trying to make it harder to write certain types of vulnerabilities. But they're always going to exist. It comes back to the when again, right? You're going to have this insecure application, and that's where technologies like behavioral analytics, that detect that something's not right. So it's not just you get in through the door and then you can wander around and do whatever you want, which is
Right.
how most corporate physical security bluntly works,
Yep.
right? Once you're through that sort of pass door.
Yeah, you're in.
And quick hint, if you're ever doing pen testing, being on crutches works really well because everyone holds the door open for
Absolutely.
you. It's the number one way I used to break into buildings back in the day.
Legally, he got paid for it. There was a waiver and everything.
I had a
Yeah,
waiver,
yeah.
right? All
Yeah.
totally above board. But
Well, there was that one time.
yeah,
with that
well,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay, right, fine. But yeah, I mean, it's just tricky.
So, and I want to leave a little bit for Q&A, so we'll finish up with this for us. Where do you see the security industry in the next 5 years? And where's the next big technology?
The next big useful technology or the next big technology?
Useful would be a good qualifier, yeah.
Because I have a nasty feeling that we're going to have a crop in the next 2 years of blockchained everything, right, in the security
Whatever
world.
gives you that idea?
And quantum everything.
Yeah, quantum everything and blockchain everything, right? The quantum blockchain is something that will be quite interesting.
IoT.
In fact, we should huddle afterwards,
that
right?
out.
Found a quick company on that one. I think the big useful technology will be the true embrace of analytics, right? Everything at the end of the day, excuse me, is just a sensor or an enforcement point without analytics. Your firewall is, your DLP is, all of it is. So really embracing analytics. And I know that we have it today, but we haven't embraced it. You have not seen what good analytics will do, right? I mean, you touched on it. Knowing that a device is operating in a way that it shouldn't be, or is very unexpected compared to its peers, is extremely useful in this sort of buggy IoT world, right? And again, I feel deeply for the IoT developers because they're dealing with things that, that crypto flaw didn't exist when they built it and pushed it out. So it's hard. But my guess is that it'll be analytics everywhere, and we'll be fighting the next problem, which is going to be complexity and emergence, right? Because once you have analytics controlling your systems, you start to get emergent phenomena in how the system operates, and that's going to be a nasty problem that will keep us all in beer for the next 10 years.
Good enough. What do you think?
I guess from my perspective, what we're seeing is this strong convergence of identity and data protection. There may not be encryption data protection. It will always be there from a science perspective, but it may not be a security product we sell. I think we're going to see that who you are, what you know, where you are, all the biometrics, all those things that go around protecting the data is going to be tied to you as an identity, as a person. And managing those identity and then managing how that identity is working throughout a system and how it protects the data, whatever classification, whatever layer it might be, I think is going to be an important concept going forward. So from our perspective, and I hate to say it, I'm the encryption guy, right? That's my business today. But also we do see the identity and the encryption coming together and just being this active protection wrapped around who you are.
From the solution standpoint, do you guys see more of the alliances pieces? I mean, obviously, you're more the network layer, the enforcement points. Obviously you're more at the data, the data layer. So if obviously there's a good synergy between those two things, and I think the data intelligence team talked more about that, the alliances, and obviously we're talking about that from a solution standpoint. Do you see more of that, or do you think it'll just end up being alliances by acquisition, that the big dogs will just come in and just buy stuff, or will you all work together in more places?
There'll certainly be alliances by acquisition, but I think there'll be a lot of alliances by cooperation too. The security problem is big enough that there's plenty to go around on the vendor side, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd much rather work with Todd, for example, than sort of try and fight Todd in the marketplace, because we can do much better to protect the customer. At the end of the day, we're all on a righteous mission here, right?
Right.
We are the good guys. We are the cavalry. It's not just about business, it really is about protecting people.
Yep.
And I agree. I mean, ecosystem, we will not survive without ecosystem. I mean, it has to be working with that, whatever element in that stack, that security solution, or where that actually it's a user who wants to do something and we want to protect it. We need all the partners, we need that ecosystem to be successful. I mean, it's core to our business today and going forward. I agree.
So again, this is the second interactive part of our show. So hopefully, I want some of you to say, okay, yeah, those guys are all right, but I'm hoping there's some of you that think that we're completely full of it. And what I'd like to is see if there's questions out there or things that we didn't ask or that you'd like to ask us. Obviously, none of us are very serious, myself and especially. Arrow team, those of you that are out there, what are questions that we didn't ask or where we missed the mark? And please don't make me call you out. In the back, can we get a mic back there, I guess, or you can yell really loud, maybe.
I got you. You got me? Okay.
There we go.
So okay, good. So I was a little bit surprised I didn't hear a little bit more about ransomware. That seemed to be the thing that hit the headlines quite a bit this last year. And the consequences, hospitals not being able to take care of patients and so forth. So I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Who wants to take a crack at that one? And go.
Okay. So, no, I mean, ransomware is a nuisance. Sorry, I was trying to find a better word than the sentence that was about to come out. I mean, I can't stand it, right? The trick with ransomware is that, technologically, we're in a pretty good place for dealing with it, right? When you start encrypting data, you change the underlying entropy of it. It's very easy to detect that something's being encrypted. There are technologies out there on the endpoint, that can detect in real time that something is systematically encrypting your files. I mean, if you just use something as simple as Shannon entropy, right? So, there's that. Ransomware has a pretty noticeable signature when it comes in because of how it tends to manipulate the data itself. I think we'll continue dealing with it. Crypto miners actually worry me a little bit more because they use legitimate sort of CPU ticks, right? It's harder to get around. Ransomware in the real world is very much a real problem, not trivializing it. I would just argue it's a real world problem where we have good technical methods for doing better mitigation. They just haven't really got into the marketplace in enough numbers yet.
Yeah, I mean, ransomware competes with our encryption business at Gemalto, right? They're encryptors. They're encrypting things. And so, they are somewhat of a nuisance. I think that there are detection mechanisms. Whenever we talk to companies about ransomware, it's more about, again, your policy, your procedures, how you are backing up and protecting your data in other ways. And it does come back to some aspect of training and identity, right? Who's on your network? What do they have access to? I mean, if you don't have access to a root disk and you're not an administrator, then you shouldn't be able to encrypt that disk. So there's some policies and things you can put in place to make sure that you protect yourself against a ransomware attack. But yeah, I guess that's.
I think there was a big spike, and then obviously it got a lot of press, and so I think there was a rapid proliferation of education on, hey, this is, how do you stop this?
Yeah, I think if you look at the big spike, there's an interesting backstory, right? So, I mean, basically, that was a very patchable, fixable set of exploits that was being used. So there's a backstory here around getting machines patched, right? Which is not an easy job for the typical company. But, making certain everything's running the right version of everything actually buys down the risk quite considerably. None of those, as far as I recall, were zero-day. They were all relatively well-known exploits that just need to be dealt with. And then segmentation, right? A corporate network shouldn't be like an M&M, hard crispy shell and chocolatey goodness on the inside. Right now, I'm hungry. There should be more monitoring of east-west, better visibility, and visibility that's actually turned into actionable information.
I mean, one of the positive of ransomware, and it was a big spike, was we talk about our business being reactionary. I think that the knowledge that came from that really quickly blew through the industry, and places and changes were put in place. And ransomware is still going to occur, right? But I think a lot of organizations have closed the open gaps they had in their systems originally because of what ransomware could do. So I think that was a positive for the security industry against that.
It did force a lot of people to do it. I've been telling them, like, you just patch your stuff. Unfortunately, it was a knock-on effect of it. This is what we've been talking about. Really bad stuff happens when you don't do that. So, I know there's more questions out there, and I know a lot of you aren't shy. So,
yeah, we promise to give the absolute unvarnished truth on whatever the question is. Right? That's the guarantee.
So the question is, as we see more companies embracing cloud applications, are there concerns with the data moving up to the cloud, and how is that secured?
yeah, I don't think it came across as well. I didn't quite parse the question. Did you?
So I think it was around as companies move more and more data and applications to the cloud, how are we ensuring that cloud-borne data is correctly secured?
There you go. Yeah, so go ahead. I mean, I've got thoughts too, but yeah.
Well, the panel before us spoke about, how the big CSPs are implementing key management as well as data encryption within their service, within their infrastructure. So you can choose to use and trust your cloud service provider to protect the data. From, again, a security profile, a posturing, a lot of folks have other methods. They're bring your own key, have your own key. There's ways to give a key to the cloud service provider, but you also still have to, allow the cloud service provider and trust them. The best way we feel to be able to protect data as it moves to the cloud is to protect it before it leaves your premise, before it leaves your perimeter. So whether that is going through a proxy, like a cloud access security broker, or any sort of proxy, whatever that might be called, or it's actually happening within the application on premise, the idea is to make sure that data is protected before it goes to the cloud service provider. Then there is no need to worry about where that data goes and how it transverses. There's also an audit piece of that. As you move data up to the cloud, you want to be able to audit it, log it, and make sure you're tracking that data to make sure you can get it back sometime in the future.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of CASB. I think CASB is a tech that's pretty powerful. One of the flaws that I see when people implement CASB, by the way, is what they'll do is they'll have a different CASB vendor than their DLP vendor, so they end up with different DLP rules going out to the cloud than their data going anywhere else. And as a data owner, you don't really care why you lost it. You just care that you lost it.
It's gone.
So you've just doubled your complexity in the system. But yeah, CASB is an extremely effective way. And then doing analytics around what's happening in the cloud and using your CASB solution to make certain that things aren't set up so things are wide open. Right? This is not an unsecure S3 bucket. Right, which is a word that seems to come up in breach notifications with considerable frequency.
I think, so one of those things is I think it's picking some level of security. When you move it out to that cloud broker, whoever that might be, that cloud provider, make that choice, and at least, at the bare minimum, even if you don't have different PKI or something out there, use Microsoft's, use Google's, use somebody's to do that. And make sure it's out there. And then I think a lot of, you hit on it, is knowing what is my data, right? And for me, and this is me as a security practitioner, so many organizations don't even know what their data is today, where it is, what it does, who actually has access to it. And now we've decided to add 100,000 new devices that we have no idea what normal looks like. So I think to your point, some sort of, in analytics we like to throw it around, but at least baseline the network, baseline servers. What is normal on a switch port? What is normal? What is supposed to be going out? Where the hell is it going, and why is it going there? If you have that baseline on your own internal network before you move to the cloud, you're going to have to be able to see what the deviations are.
Yeah, and the fun part is you'll find a bunch of business processes you just didn't know you had as soon as you start tracking data that way. I'm like, the first thing that happened to us is like, why do we have confidential data coming into the company? Not going out. It was, we didn't have a problem with stuff going out. We're like, well, how did it get out there to come back in? And there was a very interesting set of discussions around that.
Why do I have your resume? Why is this coming into me? Got another one back here. I guess we're using the box microphone, which is a very strange thing.
Yeah,
I've not seen that before.
This is odd.
Yeah, talk to the box.
Sure. So you guys
It's a
talked a
safety
lot
issue.
about technology solutions, but how do you balance the people or the user side of it? 'Cause, talking about credentials, a lot of it is through phishing or people giving their credentials. How do you balance that with the technical solutions, whether it's using the technology to override what the people's lack of education is, or actually trying to educate them to do things the right way?
I think you said it earlier, and you backed it up. I think you take it away, right? Because most people don't care, right? And that's not a critique, but a good example and a little analogy. I'm a car guy, right? So I have an old 1956 Chevrolet, which I'll talk to you about over dinner if you want to. Very mechanical. It's got a carburetor. I've rewired the entire car, right? My wife's new car, 2014 Kia Sorento. My wife could care less about how all that crap works, right? She just wants to get in her car, hit the key, and drive the stupid thing. She could care less about how it works. I think in our industry, the users don't care. So I think it's removing usernames and passwords. It's moving to a new thing. It's making 2FA just a way of just the way it does things. I think we actually don't have to educate the user. I think, in my opinion, it becomes so baked in and it's just there.
I agree. It just happens, as we talked about earlier. And Richard talked about behavioral analytics moving that way. So users are going to do stupid things, silly things. Having something active within your system that's looking at that, looking at the behavior of maybe that person, but at the data itself. I had mentioned earlier, maybe some emerging technologies around AI and machine learning, that even though a user may say this data is critical to them, once you look at that data, you realize it's not that critical. Something else might be more critical to them. So it is behind the scenes. You're going to see, I think, more automation happening behind the scenes, more active things happening based on analytics to make sure that data really is being protected the way that an organization wants it to be protected.
Yeah, changing users is hard, right? I mean, it's just a hard battle. I mean, it's an important thing that you try and educate for people to be, again, safer online, but it's an uphill struggle, because in the heat of the moment, you don't care about security, you care about getting it done, right? If you remember when the DoD turned off USB drives, some of you were probably in the military at that point, there was a massive spike in people trying to upload classified documents to the internet so they could move it from point A to point B for legitimate purposes. But nature will find a way, right? So I think our job is to let users be users and embrace them, right? Rather than blame them for doing that, and just try and make them safer as they do it, which is hard.
Got time for a couple more. So,
I have a question about blockchain. As you see that moving kind of from the crypto side onto more transactional things in everyday business, what type of risks do you see?
Yeah, wow, only 7 minutes, 38 seconds. You guys are in trouble because I definitely have some opinions on blockchain. For a start, it's a cool tech, right? It is. But it's being thrown at solutions that were not really designed for blockchaining. Blockchaining is really interesting, but I think Gartner says this, and it's one of the occasions where I agree completely with Gartner. They're like, if you build anything on blockchain today, expect to completely rebuild it in 2 years. Because a lot of the stuff we're seeing right now is built out of proof of work, right? And that's not sustainable. Bitcoin is already using the entire energy output of Iceland ++ right now, right? Just to solve basically little Sudokus, among other things, right? Or whatever the crypto thing is. I think it might be harder than the Sudoku, but they're pretty hard, actually. But anyway, there are other ways of creating consensus, right, that are distributed that might cryptographically be much more effective. There are some, like hash graphs, so there are some competing crypto algorithms that have very interesting properties. In terms of solutioning, I think, we're way on that sort of vertical hype cycle. There is a pony there, right? There has to be, right, based on all the evidence. But how it plays out is going to be, it's hard to sort of predict on that one for me. I'm not a blockchain naysayer. I love the idea of bootstrapping trust without a trusted third party. I think that's very powerful. I just think that it's such a swirl right now. So we have our C-level execs, including mine, challenging us. How do you use this, for good, right? Which is what he should be doing. That's what our execs are designed to do on the tech side of the house. How do you embrace this technology? But right now, for me, it's not clear. There are so many solutions that you could build more cheaply with better guarantees because you do have a trusted third party. It's the ones where you don't that get really interesting. Some of the things that people haven't thought enough about, by the way, are things like the immutability of the blockchain and how that might bump into the right to be forgotten and some of the GDPR things. We've been doing research for a couple of years now in this space, but yeah, tough.
I mean, I won't talk about the emerging use cases for blockchain. We'll let the industry sort that out. But you know, when we view, for all of us, when we view blockchain, it is a circle of trust. There's a security element. You have to trust as elements and information moves, and you have to be able to protect that information. So from a security community, when we think about blockchain, no matter what that use case may be, you still got to protect that information. So there's a play for security there. And a lot of the blockchains out there haven't really haven't done a good job with their security principles, and there is a place for security to be added on top of that blockchain implementation. So I do see us impacting that sort of the business today, or as people are playing around with blockchain, and as it becomes more prevalent, and whatever those applications are, there probably will be a play for security vendors and all of us to play there.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a place for it, but yeah, it's the cool thing. Quantum blockchain is going to be the next generation.
Quantum blockchain,
Yeah,
we're going to
next
patent that
gen.
tomorrow,
I like
right?
that. I like that idea. That's cool. You already copyrighted that one, right? Yeah. Well, guys, we're gonna go ahead and if there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up. We will be around this afternoon, but if there's other things you'd like to pull us aside for and ask, please do. I thank you both for your time. It's been fun and entertaining. I hope you guys thought it was useful as well. We'll be around all day.
Thanks, everyone.